So tēnā koutou katoa, everybody. Welcome to this interactive LIANZA webinar. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Helen Heath, and I'm the comms advisor at LIANZA, and I'm assisting Lara today. I've just got one eye on the waiting room. But I'd like to open with a karakia. Tukua te wairua kia rere ki ngā taumata. He arahi I a tātou mahi. Me te tātou whai I ngā tikanga a rātou mā. Kia mau, kia ita, kia kore ai e ngaro, kia pupuri, kia whakamaua, kia tina, kia huie, tai kie. Lara holds a PhD from Otago University and 2 master's degrees from Victoria University of Wellington, including a double major in archives and records management and library sciences. The thesis explored the experiences of rural library and library volunteers in Otago and Southland. Just letting in another straggler. We're really pleased with the literature review that Lara completed for LIANZA, and today you're going to participate in a discussion about how this knowledge might assist your library in responding to the needs that you're identifying in your community, and how the report can support your advocacy to key stakeholders. So welcome everyone. As I said earlier, we've got people from all over the country today, and if you didn't hear me earlier, just drop your name and organisations from where you're from into the chat and we'll see the full spread. So over to you, Lara.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you for that wonderful introduction and welcome. Sorry, my sign language might not be able to be seen very well, but it's great to meet all of you and thank you for being here today. So I have to apologise a little bit. I have a dog called Toby. This is his image. He's behind me and he loves barking at rubbish trucks, and guess what today is? It's rubbish day. So there may be some buffing in the background, but I do have treats, so hopefully he will be quiet. But thank you everyone for being here today. As Helen said, I have a PhD in education from Otago University, and I just graduated on May the 4th with my Master's in Information Studies, which was pretty cool. So I'm by no means the expert here, but my specialty often is institution storytelling or narratives. But I was thankful to have this wee piece of research, so thank you to LIANZA for that. So we'll get straight into it because I know it's sort of around everyone's lunchtime, so I hope you're all comfy. The areas of economic downturn that I sort of explored were the influenza pandemic, the Great Depression, the oil crisis, and Great Recession. These provided the framework for my literature review, which is pretty scarce, as you might imagine. We sort of explored it mostly international literature. But I don't know, do you guys want a little history run through? I don't know if that would be helpful, framing it in the context of New Zealand. So where we saw the influenza pandemic, New Zealand was lucky, we only had 2 waves. Globally, there were 4 waves, which lasted to 1920. Our biggest loss was in November, which was in the 2nd wave in 1918, and predominantly saw that it was soldiers returning from the war on the board Tahiti first, and then community transmission, obviously. So yeah, that was our largest loss was 9,000, with 2,500 being Māori. There were specifically larger outbreaks in areas of Southland and Otago that had higher than the average death rate. And we saw families, children becoming orphans, and yeah, it had the major impact that we had. Then we go to the Great Depression, where we saw rioting after the Wall Street crash of 1929. We predominantly had export loss, and our economy but we were sort of slightly sheltered. It wasn't until 1930. And that's a key thing, is that New Zealand often has the economic downturn comes a little bit later. It's sort of, yeah, we're a wee bit sheltered being further away, but it's still being part of the global economy. Obviously, we find that it hits us eventually. The 1979, 1982 oil crisis, we saw callous days. I remember my parents talking about callous days, and of course there were ways around that where you could get dispensation. Oil obviously went through the roof, and we had lowered expectations and speeding limits, etc. Then finally we have the 2008-2009, the Great Recession. New Zealand, it was described as short and shallow because of the way that we were able to navigate it. We didn't see the great austerity measures that, say, like Greece or Norway, but we do have a lasting effect on job loss, also housing market. We still sort of almost feel that now. So I basically, yeah, the themes that came out from the literature review, obviously were libraries as social institutions. And this might seem obvious, but job seeking and education were really the highlight of what happens in an economic recession and why libraries are used. So we find libraries are used to promote job seeking, particularly in places like in times like the Great Depression. In the Great Recession, we find that people are coming in to use the internet for job seeking, but also because the movement to e-government. We find that, you know, they might have lost their internet access because they can't afford it at home, so they come into the libraries and they're accessing all the e-government documents online. And students coming in for education purposes, to do their schooling and education. So that was sort of the key finding for libraries as social institutions. We then funding, economic recessions funding is the biggest theme of the literature. You find that there are growing demand and shrinking resources. You find managing budgets, cutbacks, staffing shortages, and understaffing. Your libraries are having to cope with ghost loads, having to do with more with less is a big thing. We sort of, but there are ways around this. I mean, Greece, I think, is one of the standout exemplars of having to deal with austerity measures in a time when there's more use of the library, and also culturally for them as well. They were able to collaborate and use joint procurement as their source of gathering, of collection. You know, they had a complete collection freeze. They still, even to this day, rely on donations heavily in Greece. And then I'm going through this quickly because I think sort of it's quite good if we get to the discussion side of things, really. But then we have access. How how was access is always important. Keeping doors open. I found it interesting that during the influenza pandemic, that places in America closed the doors to everyone except school-aged children. When the schools closed, they opened their doors to children so that they could continue with their education. And then we've got, during the Great Depression, this photograph is of the pack horse librarians. They go out and bring the library to the people. Access slowed down during the oil crisis because of technological innovations were coming forward, but were too expensive. So libraries tended not to expand on their access. But then, of course, we got the Great Recession, and we have the digital divide and issues about the digital divide, with people needing to come in to access, again, e-government and library resources, because you just can't afford internet access. Yeah, I've gone through this really quite quickly, I'm sorry. Mainly because I do want to have the discussion, but throughout the eras of economic downturn, we do see that there is limited access, that there's a demand for children's books. Circulation is down during the influenza pandemic. That's because people can't access, obviously. We see that outreach during the Great Depression. We see then that slows down during the oil crisis. See, I've just made everything too big. And then we see that there's, during the Great Recession, job loss, increased use in technology, and people beginning to try to do things differently because of job loss. So we see the introduction of self-service and more workload on librarians as individuals. So yeah, that's a quick run through. Really group discussion, which might be sort of chucking you all in here all at once, but sort of thinking on the themes of libraries as institutions. So thinking of education and economic value, funding and access. Has your library done anything different during the lockdown and post-COVID lockdown to address these type of issues? What are your barriers that are facing libraries now? And has your library undertaken any initiatives to promote, say, issues of access? Really is, yeah.
So you'll get an invitation. You just need to click on the invitation to go into your breakout rooms. Welcome back, everybody.
Yay.
So there were 8 rooms. So hopefully we've got 8 people who can report back from their discussions. I noticed that some people, maybe they lost internet connection and dropped out, because I noticed that during the conversation we lost a few people. Over to you, Lara.
Wow, thank you. I just, I suppose, yeah, I want to hear from you guys, really. Yeah.
Should we open up the whiteboard?
Oh, okay, yes, sorry. Oh,
I can do that if you want.
Oh, we both got it. So yeah, if you want to flick ideas up, that would be cool. Starting from any group,
well, I think we were group 8, so there's no need to start with group 1. This is Sue Sutherland here. I can no longer see anybody, so except a white blank screen.
Oh, that's a whiteboard.
But what was I going to say? Yeah, so I was with Sue Gwillim and Jane Jess Payne from Queenstown, Lakes District, so I can report on what they did. During and after the lockdown, they've looked to provide more e-resources. They certainly made it easier to join online, didn't require proof of address. And since then, they've increased their checkout numbers to allow more items to be taken. There's been a big increase in circulation compared to the June of last year. On the downside, they've got job freezes, so if they've got vacancies, they can't fill them. They've had pressure on to make more revenue, which is pretty difficult in a time when they know families are struggling. One of the interesting comments made was that with the buzz of the tourists kind of thing going from Queenstown and Frankton, with that buzz gone from those in particular, it's kind of exposed the sort of underbelly, low socioeconomic underbelly that was hidden before. And there is an increased pressure on staff because they're trying to do more with fewer staff on board, and so those are some of the downsides. But the upsides are, well, when they opened their doors again, people flooded in. It was kind of like they'd had enough of lockdown, and they have come out in numbers back to the library.
So despite the social, well, probably because of the low socioeconomic nature of it, do you think, or just because a sense of normalcy?
I think Sue or Jess would need to answer that, but yeah.
Are we on? Yeah. I think it's just that they wanted to break out of prison in a way, and just interact with other people, and we're finding a lot of younger families are coming in, particularly to Frankton, but they're staying for the holiday programs or whatever programs we're running, and they're staying later and longer after that, just to connect with their friends and the other people who attend the programs. So basically, I think they were just ready to.
Yeah, we think they're like craving social interaction and like community connectivity, because increased numbers in all of our program attendance and new attendees, which is quite cool.
Nice. Oh, awesome. Thank you. Or shall we go random? What about group 3? Who was in? Hear from them.
I can't remember which group we were, but I'm happy to go.
Yeah. Okay.
So there were 3 of us, and obviously I don't work in a library, so I couldn't really contribute to this. But we had Rachel from Waipa District Libraries, and we also had Paula, who works in a medical library. Sorry, Paula, I can't remember which DHB you worked for, or whether you said that. But she works in a medical library and a health library, and both of them mentioned about working from home and the difficulties in some cases of working from home and having to deal with a lot more inquiries online and by email, Paula in the health library had some difficulties with database authentication because authentication is linked to an IP. So she had to work through all her customers, her patrons, and sort them out with individual passwords and logons. So that was a big issue for her, and they're still working through that, in fact, and more people are working from home still, and in fact they always have people who do work from home, so working through those issues, and she says that will have an impact on funding because it does cost, so there are funding issues related to that as well. Paula, do chip in if I'm getting anything wrong here. The other, Rachel then works in the public library in Waipa District, and they've got a user pays model. Oh, so, but during lockdown, e-resources I think were free, or a lot of the e-books were free. But now lockdown's over, they're not free. fees have gone back on there now. I think, you know, Rachel was saying they're trying to convince the council to fund and not be user pays, but, you know, they just say, well, if that's the case, we have to, you know, we have to take the money from elsewhere, you know, there's going to be a budget shortfall. So they're not holding out much hope of that. In particular, we had a bit of a discussion around internet access as well, because they have the issue there that Wi-Fi is free. So those of us who can afford our own devices can go into one of their libraries and use the Wi-Fi for free. But if you haven't got a device, if you can't afford a device and you have to use an in-house computer, you have to pay for it, which seems inequitable, to say the least, doesn't it?
Very much so.
So they're not on APNK, so they've got an issue there as well. So, you know, there are some digital inclusion issues there. Budgets for both of them was an issue. They're both, you know, wondering about what's to come in the next budget round. Rachel also made the point, they put a lot of their events online. So they did the virtual story times, and they did singing, and they did book clubs and lots of other events online, which is great. And they were very, very popular, which is good to see. And she says that now some of them have remained online. There seems to be a demand for that. So they're responding to their user needs in that way. But their in-house events have now had bigger numbers. So whether the virtual events were a way of promoting them and people realizing that the library did these kinds of things, and it's led to an increase in numbers of their in-house programs. But she also made the point that Sue made about that social connection, or Jess and Sue as well, about that people seem to want that social connection, and again are chatting more and talking and wanting that that interaction, I think. So I don't know if I missed anything out there, Paula and Rachel. You could.
No, that sounds all good, Anne.
Good. Cool.
Winston's just put a comment in saying to Anne that the inequity question that you said the person's not on APNK, has that issue been advised to the National Library?
They did say that they were, sorry, they said that they had talked to the National Library and they were still in negotiations about whether National Library was going to pay for a certain, anyway, there's some, I don't know the details, but there has been some discussion, yeah.
Cool. I hope that answers your question, Winston. So another group that we haven't heard from yet. I don't know how we're going for time.
I can go. I think we were group 6, maybe. There was Joanna, Vicky, Laurel, and myself, and I think we're all from public libraries. So it was quite good because we all sort of understood each other quite easily. We sort of looked at the 3 kind of questions. The first one around themes on social initiatives, funding, access during and post-COVID. There's obviously a lot of talk around the digital aspect, you know, digital only memberships, or promoting existing digital only options, digital content increasing. At level 3, more outreach such as home delivery services, click and collect services, and just more strategic thinking around access. We thought that the free Wi-Fi, which was turned off at, you know, the APNK sites, and obviously access to devices was very much missed by our community, especially those more vulnerable. And we talked about how great it was that suppliers and vendors recognised the needs we were trying to meet. You know, such as Skinny Jump, which obviously is already pre-COVID, but continuing on from that, ancestry at home, lifting of copyright restrictions, which I think the majority of public libraries took advantage of those to share with their community. The second question was around barriers. We sort of felt that this current financial year, there wasn't so much in the way of funding issues, but we're quite aware that they're going to come in the next 2 financial years, or even 3, the first 3 years of the LTP. It's going to get quite tight, and the government funding, which is really great, it feels kind of almost a little early, and that, you know, the recession is likely to hit in the next couple of years.
Yes.
And, you know, it's great that we're trying to do lots of cool stuff now, but it's going to be in 2 years' time, potentially, where the need might be. Obviously, we're facing all our usual business as usual barriers, you know, around funding and politics and councils and things like that. We did notice that there was issues with content being delayed internationally, physical items. I gave the example, we're replacing our self-checkout units at the moment, and we're doing that remotely, which, you know, instead of having the tech here. So it's just challenges like that. At this point, I think might have been Vicky raised that this would be a good time to continue the discussion around the New Zealand-wide library system, because obviously that would enable so much better access for all New Zealanders. And then initiatives, obviously a lot around community partnerships, so creating new community partnerships, but also strengthening existing community partnerships. So I think, not sure, it might have been Vicky again, talked about financial wellbeing programs, partnering with banks. We're working with MSD on certain things at the moment. There's sustainability programs, I think Joanna mentioned that. CV workshops, all of that kind of thing. And yeah, I think that was it. I'm sure someone can chip in if I forgot something.
Awesome. Have you guys thought about, I suppose it's to everyone, how you're going to future-proof yourself from the recession that is likely to come, or is that for next year?
At the moment, it's in our next year planning. We're just yeah, taking one day at a time, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're a bit the same, but the more things we can kind of get underway now to sort of show the council and the community that we are delivering on meeting some of the needs, then the more likely we are to be able to argue for that to continue in, you know, year 2. For example, we say, oh, we're delivering these classes to these job seekers, or we're working with MSD on this, or, you know, we need funding for it, you know, more likely to get it through.
Awesome. Do we have another group we want to hear from? Do people want to talk?
This is Diane from Pokiariki.
Oh, hi, Diane.
Hi, sorry, there's no picture.
No,
I was talking with Philippa, 2 Philippas. So one didn't have a microphone and the other had a microphone and a video, and I didn't have a video, so we're kind of like a 3-legged man or something, I don't know. So most of the points have been talked about that we discussed, but I just wanted to say something that hasn't come up that I feel was important is I feel, well, especially here, that libraries have been seen as more important in the community and a greater positive community good because of what we were able to do and support the community during lockdown.
Yes.
In terms of e-resources, in terms of home deliveries, etc., and checkouts, etc. So for me, that's the sense I get from the council and the community here, which is absolutely wonderful. And then with this funding coming from the National Library, which once again elevates the importance of job seekers and COVID recovery, it's kind of elevated that even more. So I think that's been fantastic. For us in New Plymouth, we've also got 2 other ticks. We've just received the OK that under 18s are now fines free, which is
awesome.
fantastic. And I thought that may drop off. No job freezes and no pressure to make any funding cuts. So it's almost like I'm crossing my fingers we're on this positive roll at the moment.
Mm.
Philippa, do you want to add anything? Nope, doesn't seem it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Is there anyone else, I suppose, any other groups that want to talk, or any other individuals that want to add anything?
This is Hilary Beaton from Group 4, shared with Marion, Reed and Trudy from Upper Hutt, and Joanne Dillon. Not sure where Joanne's from, sorry Joanne. A lot have been said. It would be just repeating what people have already been saying. But thinking on the themes of social institutions, funding and access, obviously things were done differently during COVID as the libraries responded to the situation they found themselves in. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the programs and initiatives and innovations that people have mentioned, this was responded to in the same way. And it's varied from library to library, whether they've gone back to what they were doing before, or they're actually keeping some of the programs that they actually kept on. Interestingly, the variation is there in a lot of areas, like, for example, Upper Hutt was seeing that people are coming back slowly, but their programs are well attended, which taps into that social engagement or participation being really important. But then again, anecdotally, we know that Lower Hutt, for example, has had an increase in people visiting the library at their central library, but not at their community library. So it's a variation. It's not settled, which is what that's saying. What are the barriers facing now? Well, the barrier now is money for visitors, members, users. And so there's a strong desire to see a national movement for fine-free, or something that really brings libraries together in that way. And has any of your libraries undertaken initiatives to promote access for all? Came up with the message, you only have 7 seconds left. So we didn't get there. That's a very brief overview of actually quite a long discussion and detailed discussion, but as I said, it's already there. Unless Marion or Joanne would like, oh, Joanne's just in the chat room, but Marion, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to add is I said it was really great to see the initiative with Auckland Libraries who have gone into an automatic renewal system, which will obviously help customers with overdues, so that basically when an item becomes due, it's automatically renewed unless there's a hold or a reserve waiting for it. So that was great to see. And also Masterton Public Library, I don't think there's anybody from Masterton here, but I joined up there because it's my local library a couple of weeks ago, and found out it was fines free. So awesome. Congratulations Masterton for, I think, being the first library in New Zealand.
Wow.
Totally fines free. Yeah.
That is awesome. Well, is there anyone else? I mean, I'm aware that it's 2 o'clock now, and I don't want to keep you much, but is there anyone else who wants to add anything to the discussion? Floor is open. And thank you for the people in the chat too. I don't mean to be ignoring you, but it's awesome the discussion in there too.
I'll just say, as we usually do, we're recording this, and I'll also be saving the chat. So if anything gets dumped into the chat in the next couple of minutes, I'll be saving that too, and we'll save the notes on the whiteboard, so we can make these available after the session.
I just wanted to say it was good to hear all the public library comments, and very good to hear the one comment from the medical library. It would have been great if some of the other libraries had, you know, we'd heard from the tertiary sector, because I'm sure they had different issues, but thanks, LIANZA. Anyway, encourage them next time.
Yes, we're always really wanting to see contributions from right across the sector, so hopefully some of them will be dialing in to watch the recording and maybe send in a report from the tertiary sector, which would be great. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me too.